The following program is a Nightingale Conant production for Simon & Schuster Audio.
But there's a lesson there for us. The fact is that most of us in our culture define who we are and how well we're doing, and even our very humanity, on the basis of some very artificial criteria. Those criteria, most of the time, are considered by people in our culture to be the ultimate. And they are things like success. How much success do I have? That is, how much money am I making? How much stuff comes into my life? How many accumulations am I able to get? And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But as a criteria for your very humanity, it's a very low point. It's a very shallow place to determine whether or not you're living the kind of life that you're capable of living. Another one is performance, which we tend to laud in our culture and to almost worship. I'm number one. You see it all the time, people making a contest out of life and performance being measured in terms of how far I get and what position I achieve in life or what awards I have granted to me or whatever. And the other is achievement. How far have I gone in my profession? How am I looked at by my peers and by other people in terms of my grades and my position on the ladder of success within a given corporation, things like that. These are almost like the ultimate in our culture, in the business world, in the educational world, in the entertainment world, whatever. We're always talking about success, achievement, and performance. What has happened for me, and what has happened for a lot of people, particularly in some of my recent books and tapes and so on, is that after you live this life for a while and you find yourself achieving a lot of things and performing at a very high level and being labeled a success by all of the external standards, you soon discover that there's an emptiness to that there's more to life than just being able to do that. That emptiness and that shallow feeling and that it's just sort of almost like a selfish pursuit, gratifying one's ego and proving that we can accumulate as much stuff as we can, and success isn't any longer measured in terms of how we serve others, but in terms of how much I get for myself. And our goals become obsessions, not that we need any more, but that we've fallen into this trap of believing that we have to accumulate more, we have to get more, we have to perform at a higher level. If we win the championship, that's great, but how about doing it 2 times in a row? Nobody's ever done that before. And if we do it twice in a row, well, now we've got to do it 3 times in a row. And now we have to do it by shutting out our opponents completely. They can never get a point. And we are constantly looking outside of ourselves for these kinds of almost artificial ways of defining ourselves as human beings. And when you get trapped into that, you find that there's a lack of a sense of fulfillment. And what I want to talk about and make happen in this program is to have people ask the question, what would it be like to live your life as a work of art? A work of art that's in progress. That is, your life becomes a masterpiece that is unfolding in every moment of your life. instead of looking at it in terms of how much can I get or how far can I go, begin to see that, all right, yes, I am capable of lots and lots of wonderful things, and I have accumulated a lot of things, and I've achieved at a very high level, and I'm performing very well. But I want to take a different perspective on what my life is. And I want to begin to see my life as this fabulous work of art, that I can shape it and shade it and mold it into whatever it is that I think would be the absolute ideal for my contribution while I'm here on this planet, for the actual unfolding of my humanity. And if you were to ask anybody, what is it that you would really like to have said about yourself, whose life would you look at and say, this is what I would like to have been said about me? Or this is the masterpiece that I would like my life to be. Would it be about how much stuff did I get? Or how big was my bank account? Or how fast did I run? Or how quickly did I get there? Or who did I beat in the process? For some, it might be, and that might be very satisfying. But on a much higher level than that, the answer to that question, for me, is in looking at the lives of people like Christ, who was perhaps the most influential person ever to live on our planet, ever to be on our planet. Mohammed, Buddha, spiritual masters who were leaving a message about the power of the human mind. More recently in our times, people like Gandhi, who was able to turn around the whole fate of a nation that had been subservient to an empire, the British Empire, all through a nonviolence and all through an approach to loving people and not making conflict something that has to be debilitating or destructive, and to literally put them on a course of running their own lives, all through simplicity and all through a sense of beauty and appreciation. Or Mother Teresa, who labors in the streets of Calcutta, just serving and just giving, and knows what she is for, and knows that she's not against anything. You see, there's a real irony in all of this, and I'm not here to put down, in any sense of the word, success and performance and achievement. I'm a person who has a lot of all of those things in my life. But I've found that those are the kinds of things that begin to matter less and less, and they show up more and more in your life when you find yourself getting more tuned in to something much beyond all of that. It's like a knowingness. It's like creating a sense of what I'm here for, how I'm going to live this life that I have, and doing it in the service of others, maintaining a sense of spirituality about yourself, maintaining a sense of compassion and caring and love and decency for everyone that you meet, treating conflict and difficulties that come your way not as something for which you have to win or to master, but in fact as opportunities for you to see how you can transcend these things and not to have to use hatred and anger and bitterness and beating somebody else down in order to get to this higher place. It's very much a place of peace, and it doesn't mean like abdicating your role in life. It doesn't mean that you can no longer be an architect or that you can't be a salesman or whatever it is that you choose to do for a living. It's much beyond that. It's the way that you are, not what you're getting out of the way that you are. It's that wonderful work of art that your life becomes, that you begin to see that I can make my life unfold exactly the way the universe unfolds, with a real sense of perfection and harmony and peace for myself. And the more I do that, the paradox is that all of the things that I chased after so hard and so diligently show up in your life in just the right amounts. It's an attitude of knowing, of surrendering, not to anyone, but surrendering from the things that most of us are pursuing all of our lives, where we get on that stress-filled, fast pace. I have to achieve, I have to perform, I have to succeed, I have to become number one, I have to beat everybody else in order to prove myself. You begin to develop an inner sense of harmony, that those kinds of things are very low-level determiners of what kind of a human being you're going to be.
It's like after a while, when you read this and you study it and you write about it and you start to experience it for yourself, you start to really go there, like in a new kind of prayer, not a prayer that is to someone to do things and help the Lions win this Sunday or whatever. It isn't that kind of a prayer at all. And you begin to experience it, and all of a sudden you start saying, you know, what these people have been saying for centuries is true. I mean, it's really true. That's the first experience I ever had with that. It was just alarming. My sister-in-law, Marilyn, was driving on the Lodge Freeway in Detroit with her husband, my brother, and their 3 children in the back seat. Now, she is a hardcore, linear, left-brain skeptic, okay? Worse than any banker could ever be, all right? And any accountant, all right? I mean, you had to show me. Otherwise, it doesn't exist for her. Medicine was her model. Anything that has to do with the mind, very skeptical. This car jumped the guardrail on the other side, on the southbound lane, and landed right in her face at 60 miles an hour. She saw the wheels coming and land right there. Every bone in her face was broken. Her kidneys were punctured. She had internal bleeding and was in intensive care for 13 weeks. They took her into the hospital unconscious. And no one thought that she was going to survive the night. She was really in bad shape. And they performed surgery on her for 14 hours. And there was a team of surgeons, 6 of them. And they were talking during the surgery. As you can imagine, for 14 hours you would be talking. My sister-in-law reported to me in 1971, when I was 31 years old, and just sort of starting on this path, that she watched the entire surgery. She said, Wayne, you're the only person, you're the only weird one in the family. All right? And you're weird enough to believe this, you know. And it's true, I am, because when I even worked with the mental patients and doing my postdoctoral stuff, they all got together on my birthday, and these were the real these were people who thought they were Napoleon and were really convinced, you know, and they all got together and they gave me a briefcase for my birthday. And I said, you know, you really shouldn't have done this. And they said, oh, we like you better than all the other doctors. I said, really, why? And one woman said, why? She said, you're more like one of us. You know, it's like... So anyway, Marilyn said to me, Wayne, she said, what happened is that I left my body. And she said, I went up to the corner of the room. I was surrounded by this light, and I was in the presence of God. It was like a consciousness. It was like, I can't describe it because it doesn't have boundaries. It didn't have form, but it was a magnificent light. And I was there, and there was this tunnel. And I could have gone through this tunnel, and I had the choice, and it was so peaceful, and it felt so good. It was the most blissful I've ever been in my life. And she said, and I watched the surgeons performing on me, and I watched them working on my body, knowing that that wasn't me. When she came out of it after 14 hours of surgery, there were 2 of the surgeons, they were voting on whether they should continue this or not, or whether they should just pull the plug. She had very little heartbeat at all, and she was so badly punctured internally, and her bleeding was so bad, and there was infection and so on, that they just didn't think and if she did survive, they thought it was... So 2 of them were saying, let's just give up on this, you know, and go on to other people. The 4 doctors prevailed, who said that we really believe that we can save this person. And Marilyn then made it... She had 3 little children, my 2 nephews and 1 niece, were in the backseat. They were just little children at the time, 2, 4, and 5. And Marilyn decided that she could re-enter, even though it was painful and didn't want to do it. It's like given the choice. And she went back. And when she came out of it, she told the surgeons which ones had said, let's give up on it, and which ones had said, let's stay with it. And she had gave them word for word what they had said in this event. And she said it was at that time that I became really, truly aware. And she said since then, she has gotten to meet some of what they call NDEers, near-death experiences. And that everybody who has this near-death experience, Raymond Moody writes about it, has the same thing to report. And that is that when they come back, and they do it reluctantly, they have what we call the big picture. And since then, I mean, you wouldn't believe my sister-in-law. She is the calmest, most loving, easiest going. You can't get to her. You can't get to her. She has an inner candle flame that never flickers, though the worst goes before her. And the worst is my brother. And he goes before her all the time. And he's very linear. He's an insurance, he's a wonderful, loving, beautiful person. All of his stuff is motivated out of caring and concern. He wants to always, but he wants to do so damn much that it becomes like, all right, enough, I got the map, all right, yeah, but do you know which turn to make? Yeah, I know. And it's half an hour of that kind of, and she just sits there and just reads. And when there's a family squabble and people get themselves all upset, she just picks up a book and just excuses herself. And she goes over into the corner, and the kids say, you know, when someone will be around, their friends, they say, what's with your mom? And they all say, oh, she's got the big picture. It's like having the big picture. And these people, all of them report when they come back from that, they have this like near-death experience. It's like tension and stress and anxiety and fear and all of that stuff that occupies so much of our lives is just gone. It's just not a part of the consciousness any longer. My suggestion is that we don't have to have that kind of traumatic event happen to our form to understand the universal principles and to surrender to them and to make them work every day in our life. That we don't have to go there. That we can unmuddle all of this metaphysical psychobabble, jargons kind of stuff and begin to live the spiritual life and have the understanding that we are truly spiritual beings having a human experience and that the quality of that human experience is only available to us through our thoughts, through our mind, through our divine connection. And that whatever your religious belief, whatever label you place on yourself, try not to think of yourself as Christian. Try to be Christ-like, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Try not to think of yourself as Jewish, but be Jehovah-like, or Buddha-like, or Mohammed-like. These were not people who were asking anyone to deify idols and wooden deities and an orthodoxy. But instead we're talking about kindness and love and forgiveness and gentleness and spirit, and that we're all connected, and you begin to live that way. And it's really quite an easy thing to do.
It just depends on where you are in your path. Some people need that. Like some people who are alcoholics or drug abusers continue to drink and continue to use drugs knowing that if their life was threatened, they would stop, and knowing that they have the strength to stop at any time, but being unwilling to do it because they don't feel that the threat to their life is there. And then the threat comes. They go to the doctor, they go in for a physical, they find out that they've got a lump on their lungs, they find out that their wife is going to leave them because they're abusing drugs all the time, they're going to lose their family, and they come home one day and their family is gone. Or whatever. And that's like a near-death experience emotionally, to lose your family or to find out that you've got lung cancer or whatever. And they instantly become transformed. Now, what does it take to get people to get the big picture? Well, what does it take to get people to change? The answer to that is different for everybody. I can't pretend to say that I have an answer. There are some people who need, for example, to change, they need a support group, and they need a therapist, and they need to go to a rehabilitation center, and they need to read 400 books, and they need to listen to these kinds of tapes, and they need to reinforce it over and over and over again in their lives in order to change. And that's the way some people are wired together. And that's all fine. And if that's how your internal circuitry works, then by all means, go with it. I, on the other hand, am not that kind of a person. I make decisions instantaneously about what my life is going to be or not going to be. When I was a young boy, I tasted coffee. I had a cup of coffee that was given to me. I was about 14 or 15 years old. I tasted it. It was bitter, it tasted funny, it tasted like chemicals that I didn't want to. And I said to my mother and my brothers, I will never drink coffee in my life. Now I'm 49 years old now, okay? That was many, many years ago. It was 35 years ago. And I tasted it, knew it, and made that declaration, and I have never had a cup of coffee since then. I look at the coffee, people offer it to me and everything, and I just know that I don't want that bitter taste in my mouth, and I don't want that caffeine, and I know that, all right? So that's how I am able to make change. But that doesn't mean that that's the right way and that's the best way. And I can sit here with great confidence and say that I won't be drinking coffee, and I'll never have a cigarette. I can say that for certain, having quit 25 years ago. And I can say for certain about a lot of things in my life, that I won't be overweight, that I will stay in shape, and all of those kinds of things. For others, it's a daily struggle, and it's like it's coming to know yourself. So the path to the big picture is different for everyone. But the understanding has to be that the big picture is there, and its availability is there. And if you need to have a near-death experience, like Marilyn did, in order to get that big picture and be able to relax in the face of conflict, be able to not allow yourself to get stressed out over small things, being able to enjoy your present moments and find fulfillment and joy in them, then have that near-death experience, but have it in your mind only. Okay? So create that experience for yourself. One of the ways to do that is through meditation. Another way to do that is just by visualizing or just imaging it for yourself. Participate in your own funeral, in your mind, if you have to. See yourself dying of a horrible disease and suffering. Go through it. Experience it. Die while you're alive. Experience that whole thing. And as you experience that, see for yourself that this doesn't have to be brought into form. That I can act it out in my mind like a dream, live through it, get the experience of it, and then decide, well, I don't have to bring this into my form any longer. And make then a decision not to do it. So whatever it takes for you, all I'm saying is that you don't have to go through it in the world of form. In your physical world, you can transform, go beyond your form. You can be metaphysical, go beyond the physical, experience it in your mind where there are no limits. There's no limits to your imagination. There's no limits to your thoughts. But literally be there. And then when you come out of it, realize that, okay, that's enough. I've done that now. Let me practice the big picture. Let me see it isn't anything that I have to really create in my life any more than that. And once you're able to do that, once you can create that for yourself, then you get all the benefits of the big picture. By the big picture, I mean you know in your heart and in your soul that there's more to life than just what my body is going through. And you know that there's nothing worth getting yourself all bogged down about and getting all depressed about and all worked up about. You know it all. You see all of that. And everything that I'm doing to create that, like Marilyn, I'm always amazed at Marilyn, how she's able to just let all of that stuff just float by her. When the kids have this particular part, when my brother gets on her about that, or when things aren't going, it's how she just sort of calmly, and ever since that accident, has calmly just gone off in a corner and just sort of let it all work itself out. It's part of the surrendering process. When we take this power of this invisible part of us, it's so hard to define this. We call it a belief, or you call it a thought, or you call it your soul, or your spirit, or whatever. But that invisible part of you that really determines everything about your life. And you begin to say to yourself, how can I apply the awareness of these thoughts and how I use my mind to make my life all that I want it to be? To bring into my life the things that are important to me, to improve the quality of my relationships, to have the success and so on that I think that I'm entitled to. And it's really getting to the point where you know that every thought that you have has a potential for coming into your life, for coming into form. You start to get real cautious about having anything in your mind that isn't going to work for you. and you begin to question why you would keep any of those thoughts in you. I can remember one story of a woman who came to me one time and told me how miserable she was, that she was married to a drunk. And I said, well, what's wrong? And she said, well, he slurs his words, and he repeats himself, and he smells bad, and it's just awful to be around him. And I said, let's see if I understand. Let's see who's crazy in this little scenario you have just described. Now, you said you've married to a drunk, and the drunk slurs his words, and he repeats himself, and he smells bad, and he sounds foolish. I said, that's every drunk I've ever known does exactly that. We got a drunk who's acting and doing everything that you would expect a drunk to do. Now we got you, and you're married to someone that you call a drunk, and you're expecting him to be sober. Now who's crazy? The drunk who's doing what he's supposed to, or you who's expecting someone who is what you've defined him to be something different than what they are? He is what he is. And why would you want to entertain, why would you want to keep thoughts in your mind that are making you miserable, which is going to expand misery for you in your life by just having those thoughts there? Why not change around those thoughts and tell yourself that you're, like, if you argue for your misery, then the only thing you're going to get is your misery. You have to get that, and you're arguing for it all the time. You're going around talking about how miserable you are. So you want to get real careful about that. And I suggest to every one of you that whatever it is you find yourself incapable of doing, or whatever you found that has been a great obstacle, or whatever it is that's in a relationship that isn't working, that you just can't seem to transcend, or whatever's going on with a particular employee or a way that you're approaching anything in your business, that if you examine, just for a moment, if you examine what belief is it that supports this behavior, because the ancestor to every action is a belief, is a thought, and then work at re-examining that. I mean, I've done that so many times in my own life, and things that don't seem like they're that important to other people. Like, my wife doesn't understand why certain things about my tennis game that I play every day that I've really challenged. I mean, I grew up with the belief that I couldn't hit a backhand. And it was for 10 years I told myself that I don't have a backhand, I can't hit a backhand. And then I began to change that belief around. And it wasn't that I just, practice. I began to visualize myself doing all the things that it takes to make a backhand work for myself. I began to do that with a serve. I began to do that with a drop shot. Instead of telling myself, I can't hit a drop shot, and then acting out on that, and a whole match will go by, and a whole year will go by, and I'll never hit a drop shot, or I'll never hit a lob, or I'll never try a spin serve, or whatever. If you keep telling yourself that you can't do something, you act on that belief, and whether it's just a silly little thing like improving your tennis game, which isn't so silly if you're making your living off of it, or if you're coaching it, or any other skill area, or anything in your life, change around the thought, as you think, so shall you be. Years ago, my wife and I were going through some personal difficulties. We were making a decision about whether or not we were going to stay together, very frankly. Everybody in a relationship, I believe, has these moments and times when there's a struggle there, and you've been together for a while, and you're not certain whether this is the right path, and you're thinking about these things and so on. And nevertheless, it was a very difficult time emotionally for both of us. And I can remember years and years ago, as we were going through this, what it did for me to be in that state. I became much more loving. I became much more concerned with other people. I became less concerned with the pettiness of so many things that you find yourself worked up about, because I had a different focus in my life. And I can remember thinking, as we resolved it and got back closer together, and today are very close and very loving together, looking back on that time as like something that I had to go through at that time. And that what it did is it helped me to see how absurd it is for us to be focused on the minutia of life. Whether or not the walls are clean, or whether or not the toys are put away, or whether or not your food is prepared on time, or whether somebody is late with something, or whether the phone doesn't ring or does ring or whatever. Like, all of those things are so minute in contrast to what you're really struggling with. And then what it also helped me to do in terms of getting this big picture was to look at some of the things that other people were going through, some of the problems and difficulties that they were having Very often when something goes wrong in somebody else's life that we're close to, one of our parents gets ill, there's an accident of some kind. When Marilyn had that accident, I can remember how it affected me. And it gives you pause to remind yourself that you have a lot to be thankful for, and that you have a very powerful mind here that can make anything happen that you want to happen as long as you keep yourself centered or keep yourself focused. I was able to shift from all of those petty little things. I can remember I was doing a show out in Seattle at that time that I was going through that tough period. And somebody asked me a question that 6 months before I would have answered sort of flippantly, sort of smart-alecky. It just wouldn't have given it the attention that it deserved. I would have thought of it as perhaps too trivial. And I can remember looking into the woman's eyes who asked me the show. I was on a TV show out there in Seattle, and thinking, because I was struggling at that time, I became much more compassionate towards this person, much more tuned into the pain that they were feeling, even though it seemed trivial in comparison to what I was. And it allowed me to get to be more loving. And then I look back on that now and I think, well, that's what I had to learn. That's what it was for, that there's a purpose in everything. And that perhaps one of the things that I had to learn 8 or 10 years ago was how to be more compassionate. And perhaps the only way I was going to learn how to be more compassionate was to have to go through some of this stuff myself. So, like, you can do that. You can do that now in your own life. Know that there's a lesson in this for you. Know that there are no accidents in this perfect universe. And know that the deep troubles that you may be experiencing or may be hard for you have something in them for you. And that there's a secondary purpose to them. And if it does help you to slow down, and if it does help you to get a bigger picture, and it does help you to be more compassionate and more loving towards other people, then what you do is you begin to bless those things that are in your own life as offering you an opportunity to transcend them. And once you've transcended them, then you don't have to go back to that again. And for sure, my wife and I do not have to go back to ever doubting whether we want to make it and whether we want our family to stay intact and whether we want to stay loving and so on. We don't ever have to question that again. We've been there, and we both learned how to look within. And when you do look within, to be grateful for what this person is offering you. So that every time I think about my wife behaving in a way that I don't like, or vice versa, we've learned how to zip it, how to just not make ourselves miserable by saying things and by doing things that will just create more difficulties. Because we've been on the edge. We've been to that edge, and we've looked over the edge and seen what it's like to maybe have to raise a family as a single parents or whatever, and to be without each other. And now we're a tremendous source of strength to each other, instead of looking for the things that we don't like. So the way to the big picture often is through seeing the problems in your own life from a different perspective, and seeing how difficult other people have it, When you're wondering about how troubled you are, look at the Alzheimer's patient whose mind is slowly slipping away from them, and they even are aware that it's happening, and they don't know what to do about it. Coming up here on the airplane yesterday, there was a story in the paper of a man and his wife who just got so desperate that they had to call the police. They have 4 children. 4 little children under the age of 6, just like I do. And they had to call the police because they didn't want to raise them homeless. They didn't want their children, they were being evicted from the final hotel because they had raised their rent from $160 a week to $210, and they just simply didn't have it. And rather than put their children out on the street, they called the police and asked the Department of Human Resources to come and keep their children for them for a while until they could get themselves back together. And I thought, my goodness, what kind of problems of mine could even be anything near what it must be like to be faced with the idea of having to go out on the street with my children, my little babies. And these were little babies. One was 3, one was 4, and one was 5. Just tiny little children to be out on the streets, on the cold streets. And I made a commitment that I was going to contact them when I get back and try to get them something. And other people are helping them as well. But it also gives you time to get the bigger picture, when you see things like that. It's a good thing to remember. Another thing is that in order to get this bigger picture and get to this place, that you can stop feeling sorry for yourself. You can stop the self-pity, because it's happening you've got to trust, you've got to surrender, you've got to know that what's coming your way has a purpose in it, has a lesson in it, that there's order in chaos. And underneath that chaos, you've got to look for that order and look for that blessing. And so one of the things you might have to learn is how to get off of pity and feeling sorry for yourself. And one of the ways to do that is to start focusing on doing something new, doing something different, keeping yourself occupied. Marilyn would go to her knitting I found myself getting more wrapped up in giving talks because my talks improved, literally improved when I was going through that struggle. And so did my writing, because I was just experiencing more compassion for myself. The way to experience that compassion is to get yourself focused, get yourself on something, doing something, and then generally it will work out. The other thing, when you are concentrating on something else, or when you are doing something else, your mind can't be on what is wrong. And when you get your mind off of what is wrong, you get it on what is right. What is right is what expands, and what is wrong tends to go away.
One of the most alarming insights I had was 5 years ago when my grandmother died. I was with her. She was 95 years old. And she was an hour from death. And she was admitted to the hospital about 2 o'clock in the morning. And one of the things that the hospital did was that they weighed her for some reason. They had to have, they're into their records and keeping track of things. You don't get into heaven if you don't have a weight certificate, and maybe if you're excess baggage, you don't get in or something. I don't know what their thinking is, but there's this kind of linear, all this record keeping. I always wonder about all the people who died before we had records, before we did that, whatever happened to all of them. And so she weighed 133 pounds when she entered the hospital, and we all knew that she was very close. And then life passed from her body. I mean, we watched as life literally left her body. And there she was. There was this package of, it was getting cold and stiff, and it was like this package of bones and stuff, matter. And it certainly wasn't my grandmother, that package there that was now deteriorating and going to be gone. And when they weighed her for the death certificate, she weighed 133 pounds. Exactly the same. So that whatever it is that constituted her life, her very life, her very essence, is invisible and weightless. You can't weigh it. And that's true for you. That's true for every single one of us. That what our life really is all about, it defies the world of form. It defies the world of linear. And yet we spend almost all of our energy and our time here, in this part of our consciousness, in form, believing that this is who we are. When you learn to go into your mind, when you learn that your mind is really a place that you can visit and exquisitely touch the face of God, you can remove the tension and stress and everything else that's troublesome in your life when you give yourself time to experience your true humanity. John Quincy Adams sat in the White House. He was our 6th president, and he was the most spiritual man who ever sat there, I think. He was a man who rejected slavery while other people, including one of his best friends, Thomas Jefferson, practiced it. He was a man who was highly spiritual and very intellectual, perhaps the highest intellect of anyone who ever was there. And this is what he wrote about himself 3 days before he died in a letter to Thomas Jefferson. He used his house as a metaphor for his body. And this is really the message of what I have to say here today. He said, John Quincy Adams is well, but the house in which he lives at the present time is becoming dilapidated. It's tottering on its foundations. Time and the seasons have nearly destroyed it. Its roof is pretty well worn out. I can identify with that one, I'll tell you. Its walls are much shattered and tremble with every wind. I think John Quincy Adams will have to move out of it soon. But he himself is quite well, thank you. That concept of understanding that universal intelligence that is a part of our consciousness is not just something for mystics and people to go in loincloths and contemplate in caves. It's for us. It's for every one of us in the practice of our daily lives, in whatever business we're in.
I had a hair on the pillow the other morning. I held it up to my wife. I said, Honey, what held it in yesterday? Something did. It's invisible. In our culture, particularly in the West, we have a tendency to believe that this is who we are. And we decorate our form, and we perfume it, and we insure it, and we build a house around it, and we mortgage that, and we watch it, and we look in the mirror, and we say, oh my God, look at what's happening to it, and there's another wrinkle that wasn't there before, and how did that get there? And it's completely out of your control. It's all handled for you. There's such a beautiful lesson to learn, such a beautiful spiritual lesson to learn. If you look at a vase and watch a sculptor make a vase, the sculptor shapes his clay and finishes it up. And what is it that makes it a vase? You think it's the material? You think it's the pottery? You think it's the clay? No. It's the empty, silent space inside that the clay surrounds that allows it to be a vase. Otherwise, it's just some pottery. What makes this a room? What makes your house a house? Think about it. It's not the walls. It's not the material that has been put all around us that you live in. It's the space, the empty, silent space inside that makes a house a house. It's the space between the bars that holds the tiger, as they say in Zen. And it's the silence between the notes that makes the music. It's not the note. That's the note. What makes the music is the silence between the notes. And so it is with you. Robert Frost put it this way, more beautifully than I could ever say it. We all sit around in a circle and suppose, while the secret sits in the center and knows and knows. You must come in contact with that empty, silent space that is within, not the form that encapsulates it. So difficult for us in a world of bottom line, left-brained, analytical, get to the point mentality that we find ourselves in. But all you have to do is look around. Look and understand that whatever the intelligence is that is in back of or suffusing all form in the universe, that allows it to be that empty, silent space that some call God, some call spirit, some call soul, some call Muhammad, some call Buddha, the label doesn't matter. And I am not up here on this stage to proselytize for any particular religious point of view at all. It is not my purpose. It has nothing to do with what I'm here. It is to get you to understand the power of that invisible, silent, empty space that we all know as thought.
The awakening process, the awakened life, what a wonderful notion that is, to be awakened. It's like when you go to sleep at night and you're dreaming. The only way you know you're dreaming is to awaken. And it's a similar thing here, this awakened life business that we're talking about. When you wake up from this dream, this 80-year dream or 100-year dream, you begin to realize that the only way you know you're dreaming is to awaken. You want to create an awakening process where you really are looking back on the dream from a perspective of what is, rather than what you think it should be, or judging it. And there was a wonderful lady, some of you will have heard of her. Her name was Peace Pilgrim, and no one ever knew her real name. And Peace Pilgrim was this woman who was in her 70s when she died, I believe, and she walked all across the country, just promoting peace. She was a little old white-haired lady, and she would go on television and radio stations and just talk about how positive it could be, and then she would walk to the next city and the next. There's a book out about her called Peace Pilgrim. And she had, in one of her little booklets, something that I think is really an indication of the awakened life, a real indication that you're awakening. And this is just a real short list of what some of those things are. When you see yourself moving beyond that success, that performance, that achievement that so motivates your life, and begin to awaken to a new level, to a whole new level of experience. You'll see it this way. The first thing you'll notice is a tendency to think and act spontaneously, rather than on fears based on your past experiences. In other words, you begin to trust and surrender and to have a sense of spontaneity about your life. And you're not always focused on whether it's going to work out or not going to work out, and be afraid if it doesn't. And those thoughts are you're no longer wanting those thoughts to expand in your life. And then you'll notice an unmistakable ability to enjoy each moment of your life. Every moment becomes an exquisite part of your existence, and you'll find yourself, even in times when you used to think of them as boring or routine, like, maybe getting at an airport and being delayed for a couple of hours, you begin to find an unmistakable ability to enjoy that, and to not judge it, and to see it for what it is, and to even be grateful for it, that you're not getting on a plane that wasn't supposed to leave at that time. You begin to see it that way. And you begin to enjoy the little things that we so take for granted. The moments with your children. The times when there's chaos around and you think, oh my God, I'm never going to get through this. You suddenly can stop yourself in the middle of that and see the irony and the fun and the joy in it. And the quiet times, and even driving back and forth to work, or you find yourself having this unmistakable new ability to enjoy every moment that you find in your life and to treat it all as a gift. It's a sign of the awakened life. You also find that you're developing a loss of interest in judging other people. You're off of judgment. You're moving beyond that. You understand the truth and the notion that you don't define other people with your judgments. You define yourself as someone who needs to judge. That each one of us is defined by our own thoughts and our own actions. And even those people who are behaving in ways that are antisocial and that are criminal and so on, you find yourself less judging them and more seeing them for what they are. Not saying that they shouldn't be held accountable and responsible, of course. But that judgment, that inner hostility, that inner anger toward them is replaced by a sense of wondering, how could that little baby at one time who was in its mother's arms turn out this way? What created that? And I wonder if there's anything I can do to help eliminate that in other children, rather than the judgment. You find a loss of interest in interpreting the actions of other people. You don't become this great interpreter for what everybody is and what everybody is doing. The awakened life beckons you to just sort of observe it, to note it. And even in your own behavior, you become less inclined to interpret it and more inclined to say that this is just an indication of where I am or where I am not at this particular moment. And with no need to analyze it. You see, when you analyze something, analyzing is really a violent intellectual act. When you analyze something, you have to break it apart, tear it apart and break it open and find out every little piece of it. It's like intellectually violent. The opposite of analysis is what we call synthesis. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin talked about the universal synthesizer is love. You begin to see how everything fits together rather than analyzing every little bit of life and interpreting everything for people. You try to do less of that and more of seeing how we all fit together. The awakened life means a loss of confrontation. You're no longer interested in it. It just isn't important to you. It's like having to prove yourself and make a contest out of everything. It's just no longer there for you. The real sense of the awakened life behind that is that you don't have to make anybody else wrong. And you don't have to make yourself right. That's the real sense of awakening, when you begin to know that there's much more to life than making a contest out of it. I noticed that when my little boy, who's 2 years old, goes out to play, any place, the only reason that he does it is for fun. I mean, he doesn't try to win, he doesn't try to beat anybody, he doesn't try to confront anybody. He just goes out to play. And we lose that in the name of confrontation and conflict. I remember Tom Crum talking in his book, The Magic of Conflict, about an example of if you were an adult and you went to a playground and you decided to sit down with a 3-year-old and to make sandcastles. And you made all these beautiful sandcastles, and suddenly the 3-year-old stood up and kicked your sandcastle over. What would you do with that? I mean, you wouldn't try to make him wrong and make yourself right, and you wouldn't have a fit about it, and you wouldn't scream, and you wouldn't holler, and you wouldn't say, how dare you do this, such a thing, and be all upset about it and have made a contest out of it. You'd say, this is what 3-year-olds do. They knock over sandcastles, and it's just for play. You begin to develop that sense that inside every one of us is a little 2-year-old who wants to come out and play and doesn't have to win and doesn't have to beat anybody and doesn't have to be in conflict or confrontation. That little child inside of you begins to surface when you start awakening. You lose the ability to worry. I didn't say you lose worry, you lose the ability to worry. It's no longer a part of you. You begin to understand the absurdity of worry. You begin to see that it makes no sense to worry about the things that you have no control over. Because if you have no control over them, it makes no sense to worry about them. And then it makes no sense to worry about the things that you do have control over. Because if you got control over them, it makes no sense to worry about them. And there goes everything that you ever worried about. You either have control or you don't. And if you don't, you move on. And if you do, you take control. As you awaken, you lose that ability to just worry about things and instead accept them. You'll notice frequent, overwhelming episodes of appreciation, as she puts it. Frequent, overwhelming episodes of appreciation. Appreciating everything, being thankful. It's one of the great ways to become awakened in your life, is to be thankful for everything and to give thanks for it. You know, I'd like to see the churches of America have services on Sunday morning where they have, like, Liver Appreciation Day, you know, it's like to appreciate your liver every Sunday and have an ode to the liver, you know, and a theology of the liver and how grateful we are for our liver. And if we didn't have our liver, imagine how, you know, and then the next week is like, you know, the Heart Appreciation Week. It's like appreciate every little tiny thing that is a part of what it is that makes you alive. Your teeth, your tongue, the air that you breathe, the ionosphere, the atmosphere, the ground, the sun, the stars. It's like you start having these overwhelming episodes of appreciation as you awaken, and you appreciate getting on a plane and having it take off and having it land and having a seat and having someone to serve you a drink and being able to wear clothes and everything about your life. And as you become more aware of how much you have and how much you have to be grateful for, you become less focused on scarcity in what you don't have, because your mind is focused on what you do have. And when your mind is focused on what you do have expands. You begin to develop contented feelings of connectedness with others and with nature. You begin to see that every human being that you meet any place on the planet shares being human with you and what it feels like to be human. You begin to see that there's a oneness to it all, that there's a universal mind, that you're a part of it. And you know that each one of us is connected and that on a round planet we can't choose up sides. That you begin to know that, then you treat the people that you come into contact with the same sense of reverence that you have for yourself. Because you are, in fact, that person. It's why Jesus said on the cross when the spear was thrown into him, "Forgive him, Father, for he knows not what he does." The reason he knows not what he does, he doesn't know that he's throwing a spear into himself. Because every time you hurt another human being, you hurt the generic human being. You hurt all of us. And every time you send out love, you create a sense of harmony in that being. You begin to have what she called frequent attacks of smiling. You become more joyous, more merry, more contented as you awaken and get beyond all of this need to accumulate and perform and achieve, which is all wonderful. But when you go beyond it, you begin to develop an increased susceptibility to the love extended by others, as well as the uncontrollable urge to extend it to others. Love becomes what you are, and you can't give away what you don't have, and you can only give away what you do have. And if what you have is love, then that's what you find.
In this next session, Wayne will discuss the process of meditation and techniques he uses to practice meditation. Remember, meditation should only be done when your concentration isn't needed for driving or doing other tasks.
The idea of having a quiet mind. When I first started practicing meditating, which I encourage people to do, not from any Far Eastern guru loincloth kind of thing at all, but as a way of understanding that there's another dimension. If I were to take you, the listener, and to put you in chains, and to put you in a dungeon, and to deny you light and human contact for the rest of your life, you would probably say to yourself, this is the end. This is the end. I can't handle this. There are some people, believe it or not, among us, who, if you were to do that very same thing, would say, this is a beginning. There's a whole world there. And that if you were forced, if any of us were forced to learn how to go into that world, we would discover many, many, many things about ourselves. And I'm talking about the world of the mind. It's not an accident that all of the great spiritual masters have encouraged a kind of meditation of one kind or another, and that most advanced people, most awakened people, practice it on a regular basis. It's not an accident. It's you begin to discover how slimy your mind is. The thoughts that you have all the time, and how much disasterizing we do with our minds, and how much stuff that we occupy our minds with that is so unnecessary and so silly, so foolish, so destructive, that quieting our mind and meditating really go hand in hand. Now, meditating doesn't require a lot of training. It doesn't require somebody teaching you exactly how to do it or whatever, because that defeats the purpose of meditating. When you meditate, you really want to go in there and quiet your mind. And what you want to be able to do in your life is to have an open but not a rampage going on inside of your mind, not 1,000 thoughts barraging it. And these thoughts that you have, these are yours. These are your creation. I used to tell people, if you don't believe that you're in control of your thoughts, then I want you to tell me who is. You are the creator of thought, which means that in some metaphysical way, you're the creator of your life. Thought originates with each one of us. But most of us have trained ourselves to believe that whatever we think just sort of happens, and thoughts just sort of I call it the pop-in theory, you know. They just sort of pop in, and I can't help it. I'm walking along, and they just, boop, there's a thought, and it's just there. And I can't help it. It just happened. That isn't true when you train your mind. We spend so much of our energy training ourselves in all kinds of areas. We train ourselves in business, and if we're going to get a new computer system, we go out and we spend millions of dollars in a company, and we train people how to work it, and we want to become good at golf or swimming or tennis or backgammon or anything that you can think of. We know that we got to go out and we got to practice, and we got to train ourselves. We train ourselves, and we ignore our mind, which is 99% of who we are. We just completely ignore it. Like there's no training available for our minds. And we can all do that. I've really learned how to do it myself. No one ever taught me, but I've really learned how to train my mind. And in a matter of a week, you know, when I used to teach at the university, I taught in Berlin for half a year. There were 70 students in the class. And I would have the first student introduce themselves and their name. Then I would have the second student introduce the person who was just introduced and himself, and then each time I would repeat it. Then I'd have the third student introduce the two that he had just introduced, plus himself, and we do that for the whole class. That's by the time we got to the 70th student, they had to introduce everybody in the class by name, and I would then repeat each one of them. And I just had a very simple technique for doing that. It was just like concentrated effort on making my mind remember 70 people's names in an hour and a half. Now, I wasn't doing it to waste an hour and a half. This was a class on teaching people how to identify neurotic behavior. And it's like what I wanted to do was to teach them that they could do things with their minds, just like their patients do, that they never thought of, that they never even dreamt were possible for them. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they would have like 80, 90% recall. And by the end of the fourth or fifth week, everybody knew everybody's name in the class. And they had all trained themselves. And most people go out there and they're introduced to somebody. They say, hello, my name is Wayne. They say, what would you say your name was? They can't remember one person's name in 1 minute. And they think that, oh, I have a poor memory. But it's because they don't train. Well, the mind can be trained. And meditating is a perfect way to do that. And there's a wonderful world in there, in your mind. Quieting your mind means that you're no longer susceptible to all of the external influences that are around you. I'm always amazed when I watch the U.S. Open tennis championships that are played in New York, right near LaGuardia, at how the players are able to continue playing with jets going on overhead. And yet when I am really completely involved in a tennis match, I've had people where I've played, I've had jackhammers going next to me, and my opponent is going crazy. They have to go over there, and I tell them I don't notice it. My concentration is on the ball. And I don't hear that lawnmower going off or the jackhammer going or the airplane going on overhead. We can train ourselves to do that. And the people who are really good at any game or any activity that requires concentration know how to do that. Well, we all want to be able to be better at that, and we don't want to have our minds occupied, particularly with worry and anxiety and stressful kinds of things. So you have to learn how to focus your mind, how to get focused. And keep yourself from creating those kinds of thoughts that are always impinging on your consciousness. Miracles are available there. I meditated for a long time. It's like there would be a light. I would have this light that I would create. And it's really interesting that you can create a light with your eyes closed in a dark room. So you don't really need your eyes to create light. You need your mind to create light. Your mind can create light. And all of us do it in our dreams. We can create a color in our dream without any light. So that our minds are capable of producing that, and our minds can create smells, and we can create sounds. We do all of that in our dream, and that's just a pure thought state. So what you want to do is get to that pure thought state. I created miracles in that space for myself, and in the world that I came back to when I left the meditation as well. The result, the peacefulness, the harmony, the serenity, the energy that you begin to get when you just take a few minutes a day, 10 or 15 minutes a day, put yourself into a sensory deprivation kind of atmosphere, a tub of water, under a tree, in a meadow, whatever. Just go into your mind and begin to see the world there. And you begin to see, as I said, how slimy your mind is. And before long, it's like you're only letting harmony in. This is what I believe any one of us can do. Any one of us can only let harmony in. We don't have to let anybody into our consciousness, because all they are, it's just thoughts anyway, unless they come there with harmony. Now that's like a commitment that you could make. That if you come with disharmony, discordance, anger, stress, tension, you only get to my form. You only get to the package. But unless you come with love, harmony, serenity, peace, whatever, you don't get to who I really am. You don't get there. Because I'm beyond the need to have conflict and confrontation occupying my soul. I just don't need that any longer. I'm past that. I've gone through the light. I look at that as no longer my need to prove that I can deal with it and handle it. That's gone. So I was on an airplane, and we were flying from Miami to San Francisco, and the plane taxied out. And it got to the runway, and there was a light that came on in the cockpit, and the pilot announced that we wouldn't be able to take off. We're going to have to go back to the gate because the stabilizer that takes care of the wing flaps or something wasn't registering as working properly. We'd have to go back. There's going to be a 2-hour delay. And my immediate attitude when something like that happens is, you're not supposed to get to San Francisco in 5 hours. Okay? That when my ancestors wanted to get to San Francisco from Miami, if they left in September, and if they got there in March, April, they considered that on time. And it was a good trip if half the people were still alive. All right? It was very successful. If they could get there, if it took them 9 months or a year to get there in wagons and so on, then if it's going to take me 2 more hours or whatever, and if the stabilizer isn't working on that aircraft in anything that stabilizes anything, I want to go back to the gate. Okay, I'm not interested in being angry about that or anything. It's a part of surrendering. It's just understanding. I was in first class. The stewardess was standing there, and she said, "Oh no." She knew who I was. I had been talking to her. She said, this is what I dread. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "There's 176 people on this plane. Every one of them is going to say something nasty to me when they get off the plane. They're going to blame me. They're going to blame the airline, and they're going to." I said, "But you don't have to let that in." She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, you've got 2 packages, 2 suits that are protecting you from anybody coming to you with that disharmony." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you got your uniform." I said, "And that's one package, and that's over the other package, which is your body, and then both of those are protecting or covering who you really are, which is how you choose to process all of this and how you choose to think and who you really are." I said, each person that comes up by you and says something negative or nasty, you can just let that only be a message to your uniform, to your package. That's not me, and you can remind yourself, they're not talking to me. They can't get to me with that stuff. They can't have that. I don't let anybody come to me unless they come with love or harmony to who I really am. So you can just say, "Well, I'm very sorry," and have a good. It's like, and you say, "Well, they didn't get to me, and they didn't get to me. They're not reaching me with that." And sure enough, she stood there and she watched as 176 people got off, and I'd say 150 of them said something nasty to her on the way out. And each time she just sort of smiled and said, "Yes, well, it'll be 2 hours," and she gave them instructions on where to go. And when it was all done, she sat down next to me. She said, "That was fantastic. It's the first time that we've ever had a circumstance like this where I didn't let it bother me." I said, "You don't have to let that stuff into your life." And the more you do that, the more you allow yourself the right to have only what you want to enter your consciousness. You just make that choice all the time. I do it all the time. When I'm driving, when I see, and if anybody gives me what, I don't take any of that inside. I just say, "Oh, that's them, and that's how they're reacting to my form." But if somebody comes to me with love, with serenity, with peace, with joy, with ease, whatever, then you can have all of me. I will respond back with that. So you let in whatever you want. That's what meditating does for you. That's what a quiet mind does for you. It allows you to select what you allow into who you really are without having to be a slave to every single person who's out there and every single action that's out there that doesn't fit in with the way you want it to be. Having a quiet mind in a practical sense is really understanding that what I'm talking about is not just for discussion. It's for application. If you're the kind of person who has your mind filled with 10 different things that you have to do, and that is producing anxiety, stress, ulcers, colds, backaches, headaches, cramps, runny noses, and all of the kinds of physical reactions and manifestations of that kind of thinking, then you have to look at how can you just get a blank mind, or how can you get a quiet mind? How can you just understand that, supposing you're thinking about, you got to get to work, you've got this report you got to get out, you got to get your taxes done, You got to stop and get some diapers on the way home. The kids need to have bananas, and they've got dance lessons I've got to get them to, and an endless catalog of activities. By using your mind to do that and to occupy it all the time, none of that is going to get done. See, all of that is going to get done. Regardless, if you're the kind of person who does those things, it's going to get done. The question is, how do you use your present moments? See, anytime you use up your present moment, or any time that you are thinking anxious thoughts, you're denying the present. You're using up the present moment instead of using it up in a productive, peaceful, serene, calm way. You are somehow believing that you can't get through this day or this moment any other way, that if I don't think about it and worry about it and be anxious about it. But the fact is, it's going to get done. Your taxes are going to get done. You're not going to jail. You're not the kind of person who's going to opt to just simply not do your taxes. You're going to get the diapers. You're going to get the report done. All of that you're going to get done. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the position that you're in. You would be doing something else, all right? So if you know that it's going to get done, the question is, what's the most efficient and effective and peaceful way to get things done? I use the analogy often of when you're in a hurry, like when your body is in a hurry. That's when you're least effective at things. That's when you always drop something. You'll drop the keys, and then you'll start sweating. And then when you start sweating, you find yourself getting more upset, and you'll forget something. And you'll walk out the door, and you'll slam the door, and you left the key on the inside. Now you don't have a key. Now, in the physical world, you understand that if you hurry and rush and are filled with 1,000 different activities, that you have decreased your efficiency. Why isn't the same thing true in the mental world? In your mind. If you are filling your mind with all of the things that you have to do, and you're worried about all of those things and get yourself all consumed with them, then you're still going to be less efficient, less effective, and you're still going to be cluttered. At a moment like that, you put on a tape. If you're going to drive, you got to drive. You can't get the bananas and the diapers and the report done and the IRS taken care of in the car on the freeway. You can't do that then. You're driving. So why not be here now, as Ram Dass says. Be here now. Here's some music. Put on a tape. Meditate right there. Don't close your eyes. But just push it all out. Okay, it's all going to get handled. But meantime, I'm going to enjoy this. Meditating teaches you that you have the capacity to use your mind any way that you want to. And you suddenly begin to see that everybody else out there who's in a frenzy and all upset and worked up, that you don't have to go there. It doesn't have to be that way. Aldous Huxley, in The Perennial Philosophy, studied every age and every civilization and found that there were 3 criteria or 3 factors that were a part of every human age and every civilization that ever existed. And these are ages and civilizations that never had any contact with each other at all. Primitive tribes, Native American traditions, shamanistic traditions, Buddhism and Zen and Hinduism and Eastern philosophies and Western and tribesmen and cavemen and since all of recorded history. In The Perennial Philosophy, Huxley points out that there are 3 things that are part of every culture. And the first is that there's an infinite world beyond the world of the changing. There's some kind of an existence that is in back of or suffusing this physical world that we find ourselves in, that we are awake in. And everybody has believed that. Great scientific minds of today and all of the greatest minds, knowing that there's a world, some kind of a world, infinite world, that is endless, an eternal world, that is beneath or above or beyond or something other than the world that we're in. The second thing that they've all believed is that infinite world is a part of every single human personality. That it isn't just something that's there for some and not for others, but that it's a part of every single human personality. Every age and every civilization has believed this, that infinite world exists and that it's a part of every human being. And the third thing that they've all believed, and they've all written about, and has all been a part of every culture, is that the purpose of life, of being here, is to discover God, or to discover that invisible world, which we call God. All right? Which some call God, some call other things, but whatever you call it, so it's like you look at that and you think, you're writing about this and you try to think of yourself as scholarly, and you don't want to write something or put something on tape that doesn't smack of being true, but yet you haven't experienced it. I mean, you're just guessing at it. And then what happens is you discover it. You go there. And once you have, like the first time I went there and came out of it in a meditation, and that's the only way I know how to do it. There are other ways I know, and there are many traditions for finding that. Prayer, chanting, and there's just lots of different ways that people have had to discover that world, or even dreams and so on. And I went back the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and I did it for 45 or 46 consecutive days. Every morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, I'd go out, I'd find this place, and I discovered it all for myself. And I put myself into what Jose Silva called, in Silva Mind Control, called an alpha state, where you use the 24-second clock described in this program. And get yourself to that point where you are as light as a feather, where your head is like real light and woozy, and where your arms are real light, and where you're feeling, really terrific. I then said to myself, okay, what good is it? Does it just give me an insight that other people perhaps who haven't discovered it don't have, or does it give me any advantage in any way, or, what is it about? All I can say is that after meditating each day, I was always filled with harmony. And that's why the quote by Pascal, that all man's misery is derived from not being able to sit quietly in a room alone, really made sense to me, because I could never imagine wanting to ever hurt anybody after coming out of that, because I was always, everybody I would see, I would just feel so blissful toward, I could hardly stand myself. I just would look at them and go, don't they look terrific? And it was a really loving kind of, and with my family and with everyone, I came face to face with this connectedness.
I'll tell you how I do it. Whether it worked or not for you, I don't know. But it does for me. An alpha state is a self-hypnotic state. And a self-hypnotic state is the first thing that you want to train yourself to get to. In this self-hypnotic state, you go into what we call an alpha state. And an alpha state is really the same state that a dentist can put you in, or actually put yourself in through the teachings of a dentist, in about a minute and a half, if you're willing, if you want to do it. What I do is I use a 24-second clock. And 24-second clock is the clock that they have in a basketball game, an NBA game. So it's got these little lights, 24, then it goes 23, and these little lights, and these little dots that are in there to make up the two. Now, here's the rule. When you close your eyes and get into a very quiet space, and all you have to do, if you don't have time, is just take the last hour of your sleep and use it, because it will give you a real strong sense of total rest and energy like you've never experienced before. An hour of meditation will give you 8 hours of sleep like that. I mean, it's that powerful. But again, you've got to believe it if you want to see it. You get the 24 and you see the 2 and the 4. Now I can do it right here. You can see the 2 and the 4. And then you see the 23. But you have to see it. You can't just say it. You have to see it. And you get now the 22. And what you're going to do is you're going to count down to 1. But any time between 24 and 1 in which a thought of any kind other than the picture of the number enters, you start over at 24. If you get to 16 and you say, God, I got a dentist appointment tomorrow morning. So, there we go, okay, 24. You're patient with yourself. Now, it'll take you a few days to get to 1, all right, the first time. You probably won't be able to do it, if you're honest with yourself, until you've tried this for a few times. But that's okay, you do it anyway. Now, when you go from 24 to 1 without having an intervening thought, you will be in an alpha state. You'll be there. The way that you know that you're there, just watch what happens when you raise your hands. You'll raise your arms up, and all of a sudden they'll go like this. They'll get real, very light. Or you're breathing. And all of a sudden your head will just go like that. It'll get very, very light. And you're starting to leave your form. You're starting to go past it. All right? And you do this. And then what you do is once you get to alpha, after a few days or a few weeks or whatever, when you're able to get to alpha, before long, you'll be able to go into alpha without the 24-second clock. You'll be able to do it in about a minute, just with some kind of an internal breathing mantra over and over again. Read Ram Dass's The Journey of Awakening if you want some specific techniques for that. And then once you get good at going there, then you start asking yourself questions that you may have about your life, about anything that you want, about struggles that you may be having with your children, about your relationships, about where you ought to be going, what kinds of decisions you're not sure about making, anything like that. You start asking those questions after you get into the alpha state.
How can you apply this in your own life becomes like the very essence of awakening. You can go into a sales encounter and meditate on it and see how you want it to work out. While you cannot control how other people are going to act or react in your own mind, that's for them. Each one of us is capable of doing that for ourselves. You can certainly be impactful on how that other person is going to react to you by how at peace you are with yourself and how unattached you are to whether the outcome comes out the way you want to, and being focused on how I can serve the other person rather than what is going to come to me. You're able to do that. You can do that in all of your relationships. You can begin to look for in your own mind all the beauty and the joy and how you want that relationship to be, and you can see it and you can ask yourself that. Like I give the example often of having two selves, and one self is a thought and the other self is a form. If you hear somebody say to themselves, "You jerk, you dummy, you shouldn't have done that," you've got two people there. You've got the person who is doing the name calling, that is the thought, who's saying, "You jerk, you got that," and then you got the jerk, who is the body that has to react to what kind of thoughts that you have. So if you call yourself a dummy or a fool or a jerk, you have a thought of jerk and you have the jerk who has to react. And what you want to do, and what meditation can help you to do, is to bring into harmony those two selves, so that self one, the thought, and self two, the body, the form, are in unity, are in oneness, and that you are only calling yourself what you want yourself to be. And you are only seeing what it is that you want in your mind, what you want your body to do. So as you go into meditation, what happens is that you leave this body and you enter into that invisible world, that formless, dimensionless world of thought, and you then begin to realize that you're not even your thoughts, that you almost are watching yourself from a consciousness point of view. You're watching yourself think, and then you watch yourself react to the thoughts. And you can literally ask yourself, what's the solution to this? Or what can I do? Or why is this a problem for me? Or why am I creating this in my life? Or why am I having such a difficult time with my wife? Or why am I always having so much time with this particular person on the job? Or what is it about me where I always create I set up myself to fail? Answers begin to come floating right into your consciousness from a higher part of you, which you'll never see if you don't believe. And you can begin to apply this. There's a wonderful story of a man who was bothered and troubled by a car honking. He is awakened by this car that is honking for his neighbors next door. He says to his wife, "If I had magical powers, I would be able to put 4 flat tires into that car." every time he comes here. And his wife said, no, you don't have it yet. And then he said, well, if I had magical powers, I'd be able to put a silencer on that horn, and I wouldn't even be able to hear that horn. That's what I could do if I had magical powers. She said, no. She said, if you had magical powers, you wouldn't be disturbed by that horn. I think we show up here with a mission. We have tasks, we have lessons, we have things that we have to do while we're here. And for some of us, that's a very short time. And for some, it's a very long time. And some people will have 30 years experience. And some people will have 1 year experience 30 times. Two different approaches. They endlessly keep repeating the same thing over again, and others are growing. It's not the same for anybody. I just talked to somebody just the other day who's got 29 years working at a plant in Indiana. And his real love, he has an apple orchard. He has 290 trees. He knew so much about apples and about all the different kinds of apples and about all the controversy about pesticides and why they have to be used and which ones are safe and which ones aren't and how much water that you have to give them and why you just let nature do it in a certain way and where you plant them and when you harvest them. And he had this whole thing he had discovered about how to keep apples for 6 months by putting them in your refrigerator and keeping them cool, but you've got to keep moisture in there. He said the moisture goes out, and he was so excited about his apples. And yet he spends 99% of his life he's doing something that he doesn't like doing. I said, your bliss is your apples, isn't it? And your apple orchard. He said, I love it when I'm out there with that. I just feel like I'm with God at that time. I said, is there any way to make this so you don't have to do this other stuff, so that you don't have to spend your life in this sort of inauthentic way where you're always thinking about how much you dislike what you're doing? Well, I've never thought about really making a living at it and all of that. I said, somebody's got to buy apples, and there's applesauce that's got to be made, and there's apple pies that have got to be made, and it's like if you get your bliss, if you know what it is, then it's just a matter of taking some of the risks that go with it, and why not? Why restrict yourself in any way? What I was suggesting to him was, give yourself a chance at that. There's two things that I think about what you're doing. You've got to love what you do, and you got to do what you love. Everybody can do this. And I don't really think it matters too much what you're doing. But if you don't like it, you have options. The first option that you have is that you can leave it and take the risk that goes with following your bliss. And I know what your question is already. How do I know what my bliss is? Now, I'll come to that. So, what you do know is what it isn't. We always know what it isn't, all right, for sure. That's no problem. But you can leave what you're doing, all right, that's number one. Or you can change around your thoughts, the 99% of who you are, about what it is that you're doing. You have that option. You can decide that if you just are not willing to take the risk, or you have to stay with this or whatever, that I can change my thoughts toward it. And I can make it as creative and do all kinds of things with it and say, all right, I'm only going to do this for 6 hours or 8 hours in a day, and then I'm going to get right out into my apple orchards. And this is sort of what this fellow was doing, was learning how to go into this assembly line job that he had and do it and not have such a negative, terrible attitude about it and have fun with it and make it blissful. All right, so you can change, and there's risks involved with all of that for some people. I think that the risks are much less than most of us realize, that they're not really risks at all after a while. They're just like adventures, and they're excitement, and the people who really love you and support you in your life will support you trying new things, all right? And you begin to find out that you can live with a lot less, and that as long as you have joy inside of you, that telling yourself that you have to have a lot of stuff and a lot of accumulations and a lot of that in order to live happily is really a myth for most of it. But how do you find your bliss, then? To come back to that question. The answer to that is you don't. You have to let your bliss find you. And your bliss can't find you. I mean, it sounds strange, but your bliss cannot find you. It's like your purpose. It cannot find you as long as you're filled up or clogged up with something else. Here's a wonderful story. There was an expert on Buddhism and Far Eastern religions, and he was a professor at a university. and he had written 4 or 5 books on the subject. And he was really considered a true expert. But he had always wanted to meet a particular Zen saint who lived in India. And so he traveled there with all of his books and with all of his, and he wanted to meet this particular Zen saint, a guru. And when he got there, he introduced himself. He had made an appointment, and he introduced himself. And the man was had just like a loincloth on, and he was very simple, very peaceful, very old. And the expert began talking to him about all the things that he knew about Zen and Buddhism and so on. And the master stopped him and said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And he said, "Yes, that would be very nice." And so he took a teacup and he put it in a saucer, and the man continued to talk about all of the things that he knew about. And the master picked up the tea and he began to pour it into the cup. And the man continued talking, and then the cup was full, and the master continued to pour. And the tea poured out of the cup and onto the saucer, and as the man talked, he still kept pouring. And the tea was now going onto the floor and onto the man's pants, and finally he stopped him and he said, "Excuse me, but the cup is full. You're pouring, and it's full." And he said, and the master stopped him and said, "You are like the cup." He said, "You are so full of everything that you know that you don't have room to let anything else new in." And so many of us are just like that teacup. We're so full of all of the stuff that we have learned and that there's no more room to let anything else in. It's just all pouring out and just going past us and all outside of us. Now, if you can see that metaphor in yourself, you can begin to see that in the eyes of the beginner, there are millions of options. In the eyes of the expert, there are only 1 or 2. So the suggestion to finding your bliss is to always be a beginner on the path. Never become an expert. If you're going to go out and learn tennis and you've never played it before, and someone hands you a racket and they say, "Now, try a drop shot this way," you are open. You are willing. "I'll do that. Now hit a forehand this way. Now, well, try it this way if you move over here. And now try." It's like the beginner has 1,000 options available to them and will try everything. But if you talk to an expert about how to hit a backhand, they only know one way. Now, that's true not just in tennis. That's true in your business. That's true in your relationships. That's true in everything in your life. Stay a beginner along the path. You can get so clogged up with what you know and with the negativity that goes with that, and all the rejection, all the judgment that goes with that, because you have to reject all kinds of other points of view in order to make sure that yours is the only one that ever gets heard or ever gets used, that you don't have any room inside of you for something new and something exciting and something different and expanding yourself and so on. So be wary of experts, especially if you're one yourself. Be wary of yourself becoming one, because then you limit yourself. And by limiting yourself, your bliss, your purpose, which is there, can't find you. It's like an artery that's clogged up with cholesterol. I mean, it just can't flow. Nothing can flow through it because it's too clogged. You've got to unclog yourself. And the way you unclog yourself is by opening yourself up and advancing confidently and doing things that make sense to you, that make you feel good, that are of service to others, that are useful to other people, whatever it is that you're doing. It's like the stuff that you're searching for so desperately, and I see so many people out there that are struggling to achieve, struggling to perform, and struggling. Their whole life becomes this struggle to get. And I think to myself, if you just could only understand that there's much more to this. I was watching a show on TV the other day. It was a group of former prostitutes, and each one of them talked about how they got into this business of being a prostitute. And I think of this because I have 6 daughters, and I think that the thought of one of my daughters having to someday go out and or not even having to, but choosing to go out and sell her body in order to make money. And many of these women came from very fine backgrounds. Every one of them talked about this addiction to money. I was sitting watching with tears coming down my eyes, thinking to myself about the addiction to money. And every one of them said that the thing that they had to get over before they could get out of prostitution was their addiction to money. That they knew about all the dangers of disease and the physical dangers to them and the rottenness of the profession that they found themselves in and how corrupt it was. They knew all of that. And this addiction to money seemed to be so profound, so important to them that one woman had spent 7 years trying to get out of doing this kind of thing because she was making $5,000 or $6,000 a week, for which she didn't pay any taxes on, and which was just like, and she found herself just spending all the time on drugs and on clothes and on jewelry and whatever it was. It was like this addiction that she kept convincing herself that she had to have this stuff. And meantime, the work of art that I'm talking about in this program, that you want your life to become, to unfold this masterpiece, is like the daily activity of your life. And what the daily activity of her life was this revulsion, this loathsomeness that she felt for what she was doing, and her dislike and her hatred, and her life became that. And that's what kept expanding for her, because what you think about is what expands. The more that she would think about how much she hated it, the more hatefulness would become a part of her life. And yet the only reason that she was doing this, according to her, was her addiction to money. And she said, I had to go on a detoxification program. I had to detox myself, not from drugs, not from alcohol, not from anything like that, but from money, from the belief that I couldn't live the kind of life I wanted if I didn't have these large amounts of tax-free money that was coming into my life. Now, in some ways, if you're doing the kinds of things that you don't like, and you're living the kind of life that you find loathsome, and you're constantly in pursuit of just getting more and getting some kind of an award or getting a lot of money in your hand, you too are a form of a prostitute. That's a prostitution of your basic divine self, of who you really are. And until you come to that awareness, until you understand within you that this money thing that you've convinced yourself you have to have in order to have success or happiness or joy or harmony in your life, you're never going to get on the path that I'm talking about. You're going to convince yourself that I am only doing what I'm doing because it's going to ultimately get me all of this stuff. I'm going to have all of these things. Meantime, your inner self, the person, the observer that is with you at all times, that voice, that conscience, that inner thought that is basically your humanity. That's what makes us human. That invisible mind that we are always with and always a part of is always in disharmony and disarray. And you don't have to go to the extreme of being a streetwalker or being a pimp or some of the extreme kinds of things that we think of when we think about prostitution and prostituting ourselves in some way or another, or being criminals. But in a sense, the same principle is working in you. And if you can get rid of your addiction to the belief that you can't be happy, or that you're doing what you're doing because it's going to give you happiness through your accumulation of this money, I just want to tell you what every single one of those women said, that what you are buying with that money simply isn't worth it. And the cost to your own self, to your own harmony, to your own sense of who you are as a human being is 10 times greater than what you're getting as a reward.
I had a client. His name was Lou Mastriani. He was a client of mine up in New York. And he came to me for 6-7 weeks of therapy. And we worked together. And after that, I just figured it was over. I was what I call a do-do therapist. You know, you got to go out there and do it now. You're going to just sit here and talk about your mother. Just not interested. It's just boring. You know, I got enough of that. I got enough problems with my own mother. I don't want to hear about yours, you know.
But if you want to change, then here's what we do. And Lou wanted to sort of talk, and then we got to a point where he knew that it was time to go. These are the things that you've come for, and now you can change and work on them. And he was one of these people who was never happy. He didn't understand the great messages, the great understanding that happiness itself is the way to live life. It isn't something that you're going to ever get. It's something that you bring to life, that success is an inner process. It's something you bring to life. It's not something you get from life. And so in the last day, I told them, I said, Lou, you've always talked to me about how great it was when you were a little boy living out in Sag Harbor, and how much you loved to go out to the beach, and you'd spend your days at the beach, and those were the greatest things. I said, I'm going to give you 4 prescriptions. And these 4 prescriptions I give you, you have to follow them to the T. He said, all right, Wayne, I'll do whatever you want. He always knew I was a little on the loony side. And Lou was we became buddies. And so I said, you're going to go out I'm going to send you out next Wednesday instead of coming here. You're going to take the day off. He had a furniture business. I said, you're going to close up your business for the day, and you're going out to the beach, and I'm going to give you 4 prescriptions. And the first prescription you're going to open at 9 o'clock in the morning when you get there. The second one you open at noon. The third one at 3, and the last one at 6 o'clock. Will you do it? He said, yeah. I got this from Norman Vincent Peale, who had told me this was a great technique for people who are sort of into that type A stuff and always in a hurry and never wanting to be happy but always wanting to talk about it. So I gave Lou these 4 envelopes, and I sealed them, and I wrote this in. And he went out he was ready for his day at the beach. He hadn't done it since he was 9 years old. And he opened up the first envelope at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I had written in the envelope inside, I'd written the word, listen. That's all. And for 3 hours, he had to walk up and down the beach and just listen. Just listen to the birds, to the ocean, to the wind, to all the beautiful things that the beach has to offer. Just be there in the moment. And he did that for 3 hours. And then at noon, he got to the second envelope, and I had written in there, reach back. And then there was a poem that I had put on there by James Kavanaugh, which I have in my parenting book on raising kids. It's called Little Boy, I Miss You. God, you guys could listen to this. James Kavanaugh wrote it on his 45th birthday, the day his brother died, who was only a year older than him. Some kind of nervous, crazy disorder. It goes like this. Little boy, I miss you. With your sudden smile and your ignorance of pain, you walked through life and devoured it, with nothing but misty goals to keep you company. You wandered through quiet woods with friends, and you were startled by a shuffling porcupine. Your heart beat mightily when you chased frogs and caught one too big for a single hand. There was no time for meaning. A marshmallow gave it on a sharpened stick. A jackknife in your pocket gave you comfort when your friends were gone. A flower hidden in the woods behind an aging, shriveled log. A dog who licked at your fingers and chewed at your jeans. A game of football that you didn't expect. A glass of cider. A cricket's cry. When did you lose your eyes and ears? When did taste buds cease to tremble? When's this sullenness, this mounting fear, this quarrel with life, demanding meaning? That mounting fear is leisure's bonus, and it's the pain that forbids you to be a boy, be a girl. I had Lou think about that for 3 hours. Reach back, and don't let an old person move in. Don't let a tired person move in. Don't let a sick person move in. Not into this beautiful form that you inherited. And at 3 o'clock I had written on there, as he opened the envelope, re-examine your priorities, which I'd encourage all of you to do. Who are the most important people in your life? Who are they? What would you do if you had 6 months to live and you knew it? How would you spend that time? Who would you be with? You got kids and you don't have time for them because you're too busy? Be with those kids. Teach them how to play ball. You're not raising grass, you're raising kids. Be there for your wife. Tell her how much you love her. Send love out wherever you can, and you'll see the success that you're chasing so desperately come jumping into your life. Re-examine your priorities. Walk as you talk. Be there for the people you love, and you'll see your business and everything else growing. And at 6 o'clock, I had Lou write the final envelope, and I'd encourage all of you to do it. I said, Lou, now write your worries in the sand and see how long they stay there. I tell people, supposing you went to sleep and you had a dream, and in your dream you had all these different characters, and you had all of this money, and you had everything that you wanted in your dream. And then you woke up, and then you look back at your dream, and you became attached to the stuff that you had in your dream. And you said, wait a minute, I want that. There was gold in there. There was silver. There was all of these friends. I had a Ferrari there. I mean, all of this. I got to have that. Somebody would come away and cart you off and put you in a rubber room and say, that was a dream. You can't be attached to that. That's just a thought that you have. That's the way you got to view life. Instead of it being an 8-hour dream, it's an 80-year dream or a 90-year dream. And at the end of the dream, you don't want to be looking back at all of the stuff that you wish you could still have, because you can't have it. You don't get any of that. So you try to detach yourself now, while you're here, while you're alive, from the need to have that stuff. Instead, you just let it sort of all flow. As absurd as it would be for you to be attached to the stuff that you had in your dream, it's that absurd for you to be attached to the stuff that you're having in this dream. You have to die while you're alive. Now, that's a very hard concept for people to get. But you have to experience your own death while you're alive. Let me tell you a story. It's a wonderful story. It's an old, ancient story. I'll paraphrase it. There was a hunter who lived in India, and he would go to Africa every 2 years, and he would bring back animals and prizes and things like that. Well, one year he took off and he went to the jungle, and he discovered this large enclave inside the jungle, and it was filled with beautiful parrots, beautiful birds, multicolored, and they all talked. And he couldn't get over it. And he put a net out over one of the trees, and he captured one of the parrots. And he put the parrot in a cage. And he brought the parrot back to be with him in India as his pet. And he fed the parrot sunflower seeds, and he fed him rice, and he took wonderful care of him. He was very good. Kept him in the cage. 2 years went by, and he talked to the parrot every day. And he said to the parrot, I'm now going back to Africa. Is there anything you would like me to say to your friends back there in the jungle when I'm back there? The parrot said, yes. Tell them that I'm very happy in my cage. Tell them that I am joyful and that I love being in my cage here with you. Just tell them that. The hunter went back to Africa. He went back to the place in the jungle where he had been 2 years before. And he told the story. He said, your friend that I took back has a message for you. And the message is that he is happy in his cage, that he is joyful with me, and that he has no regrets. At the instant of hearing that, a bird on one of the branches keeled over and dropped dead. Dropped dead. Stiff. The hunter assumed that he was just filled with sorrow at hearing of what had happened to his friend. So he went back to India, and he told his parrot what had happened. He said, I went back and I did just as you said. And I told them all out there, and at the moment that I told it, apparently one of the parrots was so upset that he'd missed you so much that he just dropped dead. And at the instant that that happened, the parrot in the cage keeled over, dead. His legs went straight up in the air, and he went stiff. The hunter was beside himself. He couldn't figure out how could this happen. And he took the dead parrot out of the cage, opened it up, and threw it out on the woodpile. The instant that the parrot landed on the woodpile, he flew up to the branch. And the hunter said, you tricked me. What is this? I thought you were dead. And the parrot said, my friend was sending me a message. He told me, by his actions, that in order for you to escape from your cage, you must die while you're alive. Okay, now that's an old story. That's an ancient story that's been told over the years. What does it mean? I mean, don't you see that this is a cage? That the whole planet is a cage? If you can just stand back far enough and see that we're still restricted by the limitations placed on us as human beings. We're stuck here, or maybe in our homes, or in wherever we are. We're all in cages. And even though we have more room to manipulate, we may even have a whole planet, we're still sort of in cages. Now, how do you escape from the cage that you're in? You have to die while you're alive. You have to literally experience your own death. All of us have to. All of us are going to die. So why not experience it in advance? And see yourself out of your body, gone, but able to look back at what's going on now. Just like the dream, where you have the dream and you have everything you want, but you're able to look back at it. As you do that, you begin to see the folly, the absurdity of hanging on to anything, of being attached to anything, of needing anything, of telling yourself that I can't be happy if, from the perspective of having died, but being able to look back on it just like the dream. As soon as you can do that, as soon as you can experience yourself formless, dimensionless, form and all of the attendant things that you hang on to become irrelevant. They're not necessary any longer. You have a whole new way of living, a new way of being. Let's make it real clear that when I say we have to die while we're alive, that this is not a physical act. You certainly don't have to die and experience your own death. What you have to do is you have to do that in your mind. You have to really see yourself, and that's, by the way, when they train people in meditation and in becoming high spiritual masters and so on, they literally expect them to experience their own death, to know what it's like, to feel it inside. For me, how I apply it in my life is that I keep reminding myself that an 8-hour dream and an 80-year dream are basically the same if there's no such thing as time. And I keep reminding myself that being attached to anything in the sense of needing it and having to have it and identifying and defining myself by the acquisition or the getting someplace by those kinds of acts is absurd from the perspective of my no longer being here in form. I'm like Carl Jung when they said, do you believe in life after death, or do you believe there's a God? He had studied it all of his life. He said, no. He said, I don't believe it. I know it. He said, I absolutely know it, that you cannot kill thought. You cannot kill spirit. You cannot kill the higher consciousness. That's part of the eternity, just like the universe is eternal. So too are you. So when you know that and live that, then it becomes less and less scary, the idea of your form dying. So I try to look at everything that I'm doing from the perspective of being able to look back at it from the point of not being here any longer, from the point of being dead, or from the point of when I'm looking back at what was in my dream. While you're in the dream, everything that you're doing is very real, very exciting, very exquisite. It's not like you're going through it and saying, oh, this doesn't count. I got my fingers crossed. There's no countsies on this. That isn't the way it is. You're experiencing. But when you awaken, you don't look back on it and say, oh, I want all of that stuff back. I have to have that. If I didn't get this, and if I only would have done it this way. You don't do any of that. You just move on. You just move on to the next level. And that's pretty much what I'm talking about here. you now have a new perspective. And the perspective is of not needing anything in a very short time. In a very short time for all of us. I mean, it's just a speck away. In an eternity, it's just a speck away. We won't need any of this stuff. Try to detach yourself from it now so that you can flow, so that you can be part of that perfection, instead of always worrying, always angry, always hurting, always suffering, all of that suffering. See, all suffering gets played out in form. There's no suffering in thought. There's no suffering there. And that was the thing that my sister-in-law, Marilyn, said, that there was no suffering. There was her body going through all this pain, all this suffering and everything, and she wasn't suffering at all. Who she wasn't suffering. There doesn't have to be suffering if you can really live there. You don't have to have a terrible accident or come close to death or anything like that to do this. You can really get
Has been a Nightingale Conant production for Simon & Schuster Audio.